Prompts. Discuss the modern applications of America's founding documents in contemporary society. Provide examples of how the principles and values outlined in the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and Bill of Rights are relevant and impactful in shaping today's nation. Prompt number 2. Examine the profound impact of wars on American history. Discuss how major conflicts such as the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World Wars, and others influenced political, social, and economic developments and the nation's identity and global standing. Provide specific examples to illustrate the transformative role of war in shaping the United States. Prompt number 3. Explore the significant role of religion in shaping American history. Analyze how various religious beliefs, practices, and movements have influenced political, social, and cultural developments throughout different periods of American history. Provide concrete examples to highlight the impact of religion on the nation's identity and its evolving relationship with religious freedom and diversity. Prompt number 4. Examine the transformative effects of technology on American businesses and military. Discuss the specific advancements, innovations, and their implications on industries, economic growth, military strategies, and national security, providing examples to illustrate the profound changes brought about by technology in both sectors. Trace the evolution of civil rights throughout American history, encompassing women's rights, minority rights, and other marginalized groups. Examine key milestones, legislative changes, and social movements that have influenced the fight for equality and justice, and discuss the impact of these transformations on the nation's progress towards a more inclusive society. Modern application of America's founding documents, the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land and is constantly being revised and debated every time a precedent is made for a ruling. Declaration of Independence was more of a non-legally binding document and looked upon as a sort of social contract between the federal government and the people. It includes natural rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, which guarantees civil rights and liberties coupled with due process of the law and prohibits the federal government from interfering with interstate matters. Freedom of speech and the inability of the federal government to impose an official religion was very critical in the founding of the United States of America. The Constitution helps with checks and balances. It establishes checks and balances. This is a separation of powers among the three arms of government, namely the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. This ensures the proper functioning of government institutions and reduces the occurrence of abuse of power. The amendment process. The Constitution is a flexible document and allows for adaptation to changing times. Some of the most famous amendments include the Sixth Amendment, which protects citizens against harm by the criminal justice system. Application in modern society. The founding documents are all applied in America's modern day-to-day government. The Second Amendment gives citizens the right to own firearms. James Madison wanted to address the concern of a federal militia having too much power over citizens and the inability to defend themselves from oppression. The gun debate is a very heated one. Representative Gabby Giffords getting shot and the Sandy Hook massacre made people see the dangers of guns, and instead of going against the Second Amendment, it was seen as better to restrict gun sales to persons who had a history of violence or an unstable mental health. Prompt number 2. Discuss how major conflicts such as Revolutionary War, Civil War, World Wars, and others influenced political, social, and economic developments and the nation's identity and global standing. The Revolutionary War was fought for the freedom and independence of America from Great Britain. Some of the reasons included the enormous taxes that were being imposed on the colonies to fund Britain's foreign wars. These included the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and Currency Act. The battle officially began at Lexington and Concord as the Fast Battle. Benjamin Franklin helped coordinate French alliance support through a diplomatic trip to Paris, and the win at Saratoga gave the French government confidence to go ahead with the decision. The deciding victory for the Continental Army was the Battle of Yorktown in 1781 with the help of the French army. The Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was fought to avoid secession of the South from the Union, and it eventually became more about ending slavery and establishing values. The border states, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, were critical during the period of the war. The North, which was a Union army, won the war due to the advantage of a larger population, access to resources, and industrialization, which helped them with efficient production. World War I, 1914 to 1918, and World War II, 1939 to 1945. World War I occurred mostly due to nationalism and nations building up their military arsenals. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife by Bosnian Serb nationalists in Sarajevo sparked the war. Trench warfare was a major tactic in huge stalemates between Allied and Axis powers, especially during winter. Soldiers suffered harsh conditions due to the poor hygiene in the trench warfare system. Shell shock, machine guns, trench warfare categorized World War I. World War II started when German aggression and annexation of European states began. France and Britain tried to play appeasement, but in vain. America tries to play neutral but was forced into the war after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Influence of wars on America. Military strategies like surprise attacks used in the Revolutionary War, the Anaconda Plan that was used to squeeze the South during the Civil War, and the mistakes learned from World War I helped better refine weapons for World War II, and this has increased the efficiency and strength of the United States Army. Economic impacts. The introduction of the assembly line, making the production of goods much faster and more efficient, was realized just after World War I. Henry Ford first introduced this concept with his Ford Model T factory in Highland Park, Michigan. Massive employment opportunities for people, especially contracts for the military industrial complex. America was able to cushion the biting effects of the Great Depression with the massive job opportunities that were availed after the onset of World War II. Social impacts. The Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, and the passage of the 13th Amendment, which freed the slaves. President Abraham Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slaves behind enemy lines, but people wanted something better and documented, which led to the passage of the 13th Amendment, December 18th, 1865, and the abolition of slavery in the United States. Women won the right to vote in 1919 and ratified on August 18th, 1920, after World War I, with the help and influence of President Woodrow Wilson. It was a hard-fought battle for women, and the win never came easy. This amendment granted women universal suffrage and the right to vote. This was after the onset of World War I, which was also called the Great War, and women were starting to demand more representation. America, winning the Revolutionary War against the British, inspired other countries around the world that were under oppression, and these values hold even today with America's support for Ukraine against Russian oppression. Political impacts. There was a huge demographic shift as more African Americans left rural areas to move into the cities. Urbanization increased, conscription was introduced, and the rise of national security through the creation of agencies like the FBI and the CIA, the three-letter agencies basically. The Bracero Mexican Immigrant Farm Labor Program, which increased the number of Mexican farm workers in America. Mexican immigrants greatly impacted the cultural demographics of the areas they settled in. An executive order called the Mexican Farm Labor Program established the Bracero Program in 1942. There was a shortage of labor in farming states, especially in the South and Western America, due to the huge waves of migration to the city and urban centers, and this forced Congress to pass the Bracero program. Analyze how various religious beliefs, practices, and movements have influenced political, social, and cultural developments through different periods of American history. Provide concrete examples to highlight the impact of religion on the nation's identity and its evolving relationship with religious freedom and diversity. Number one point is religion has been a part of American history, with most of the population being of the Christian faith. From the Puritans escaping religious persecution to the Great Awakening, the abolitionist movement during the Civil War, and the Civil Rights Movement. The Great Awakening is a time when religion became of importance to the American public. Lots of change was going on and different denominations started springing up. The Salem witch trials in Massachusetts from 1692 to 1693, where Betty Parris and Abigail Williams, who were daughter and niece respectively to Reverend Samuel, fell ill of a mysterious sickness, and it was attributed to witchcraft. Lots of innocent people were rounded up and arrested without due process. Witch tests were conducted to know whether a suspect was practicing witchcraft. The lesson learned from this was it's not good to practice superstition, and on the other hand, the Constitution guarantees no official state religion, which has helped reduce the risk of oppressing religious minorities. The 9/11 attacks made people think differently of Islam, but it doesn't mean all Muslims are bad people, and America is still a beacon of hope for immigrants from Islamic countries. The abolitionist movement most prominently included the Quakers and Methodists, who were against the institution of slavery. Harriet Tubman was housed in Thomas Garrett's house in Wilmington, Delaware, who was a famous Quaker and helped her on her missions up north. Tubman's ability to push slaves up north with the help of the church helped cement the strong bond between African Americans and the church. The civil rights movement was led by a famous Baptist preacher called Martin Luther King, who helped usher in a new era of equality and rights for colored people. The church, especially in the Deep South, was a congregation point for most blacks, and it is still a pillar of support in the black community up to this day. Moral, spiritual, and educational support are all services the church offers the communities they operate in. 4. Discuss specific advancements, innovations, and their implications on industries, economic growth, military strategies, and national security, providing examples to illustrate the profound changes brought about by technology in both sectors. American businesses and the military have a complex, intertwined relationship which can be analyzed through the military industrial complex. Usually, when America was at war in both world wars, there was a demand for military equipment to be mass produced. This encouraged industries to apply the 4T assembly line model of mass production, which ensured there were enough parts and spares for the war effort and caused a mass migration to urban centers where there were not enough people to fill jobs, and greatly helped America recover from the ills of the Great Depression. Technology helped the North win the war against the Confederate States in that they didn't need slavery to mass produce food when they had the technology that reduced the need for human intervention. Military advancement in tech helped America during the Manhattan Project from 1942 to 1945 to create an atomic bomb that was able to decimate Japanese territory and kill their morale, leading to the eventual surrender on August 15th. 5. Trace the evolution of civil rights throughout American history, encompassing women's rights, minority rights, and other marginalized groups. Examine key milestones, legislative changes, and social movements that have influenced the fight for equality and justice, and discuss the impact of these transformations in the nation's progress towards a more inclusive society. So the first point is the Emancipation Proclamation and the passage of both the 13th and 14th Amendment. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in America, and the 14th Amendment gave black males full citizenship status as citizens and ended the Three-Fifths Clause. The Powell v. Alabama decision, in which the Scottsboro boys were wrongfully arrested and couldn't afford legal defense, was defended by the 14th Amendment. The March on Washington, 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic I Have a Dream speech. Bloody Sunday, 1965. Selma to Montgomery. Marches were attacked, leading to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which gave all black people the right to vote, and it took away the voter discrimination and the poll taxes. And then one of the in modern society, the George Floyd shooting, May 25th, 2020, sparked the Black Lives Matter movement, and all the history can date back to the misfortunes of African Americans in America. On the part of women's rights and minorities, the Seneca Falls Convention, 1848, marked the beginning of organized women's rights advocacy. The 19th Amendment, August 18, 1920, granted women the right to vote. This was after World War I. The second wave of feminism from the 1960s to the 1970s fought for reproductive rights, workplace equality, and gender equity. LGBTQ plus rights. The Stonewall Riots, 1969, ignited the modern LGBTQ plus rights movement. Uh, the famous movements in the women's rights modern day, we have the famous Me Too movement, which had a wave of feminists resisting oppression in the workplace and by male figures of authority, is a byproduct of the women's right to equality. And then Executive Order 11246, originally issued by President Lyndon B. Johnson, was amended on July 21st, 2014, and sexual orientation and gender were added to the list of minorities.